The air outside was cold, and Malik's hands were buried deep in the pockets of his hoodie. He stood for a moment in front of the glass door of the gun store, trying to gather courage. His breath made little clouds as he exhaled, and his fingers tightened into fists inside his sleeves. He wasn't here to cause trouble. He wasn't looking for a fight. All he wanted was to ask a few questions about hunting gear, licenses, maybe prices. His school had started a new outdoors club, and for the first time Malik had a chance to join something that felt exciting, something different, but still, this wasn't the kind of store he was used to walking into. Not in this small town, not as a 17-year-old black teen wearing sneakers and a hoodie. He looked through the window and saw a few people inside, mostly older white men. They were standing around glass display cases filled with rifles and shotguns. Some leaned over, chatting quietly, while others pointed at gear hanging on the walls. The man behind the counter was bald with a thick beard and wore a camo vest. He looked busy, focused on polishing a long hunting rifle. Malik took a deep breath, reached out and pulled the door open. Ding! The soft chime rang above him, and that's when everything changed. It was just a bell, small, ordinary, but the sound cut through the air like a blade. Every head in the store turned toward him. The talking stopped, laughter faded, and in 1 second all movement seemed to freeze. Malik stepped inside slowly, trying not to let his nervousness show, but he felt it. The weight of those eyes watching him. They weren't looking at him with curiosity or friendliness. No one smiled or nodded like they did at his school or the corner store. These stares were cold, sharp, full of silent questions. Why are you here? What do you want? He took a few steps forward, pretending to be calm. He glanced at one of the displays, pretending to read something, but his heart was beating faster now, louder. The air in the room felt thick, like he had walked into the wrong house, and everyone was waiting for him to leave. One man near the back shifted slightly, his hand moving toward his side, where a holstered pistol rested on his belt. Another leaned in toward his friend and whispered something, eyes still locked on Malik. The friend chuckled under his breath, shaking his head. Malik heard none of the words clearly, but he didn't need to. He had lived with that tone before, the kind that didn't need to shout to make you feel small. He looked toward the counter, hoping for a break in the tension. The store clerk was staring too, no longer polishing the gun. His hands were out of sight, possibly below the counter. Malik's throat went dry, but he forced a smile and began walking toward him. Each step felt heavier than the last, like he was dragging a chain behind him. Just ask the questions, he told himself quietly. Don't let them see you're nervous. He knew the facts. It wasn't illegal for him to be here. He wasn't doing anything wrong, but facts didn't always matter in moments like these. Sometimes people saw your skin before they heard your voice. Sometimes they made up their minds before you could say a word. The silence stretched on as he reached the counter. His sneakers made the only sound as they squeaked lightly against the floor. Still, no one said a word. No one moved. Even the air felt colder somehow, like the whole store had changed temperature when he walked in. Malik stood at the counter now, waiting, hoping the clerk would speak first. He opened his mouth slightly but closed it again. Should he explain why he was here? Would that make it better? Should he smile more, speak softly, lower his shoulders so he didn't look too confident? His mind was racing, twisting itself in knots just to seem less threatening. He glanced around again, pretending to be interested in the shelves, but he could still feel their stares like a spotlight on his back. He wasn't even sure if he should keep going or just walk back out. Leaving now would feel like giving up, but staying made his skin crawl. Someone coughed in the back, and Malik jumped slightly. That tiny sound broke the silence for a second, but then it returned even heavier. Still, he didn't run. He didn't turn away. He kept standing there, hands still in his pockets, back straight, because even though this place made him feel small, he knew who he was. He knew what he came for, and deep inside, he refused to be treated like a threat for just existing. The chime above the door had rung once, but its echo was still bouncing through the store, and though no one had said much yet, the message was loud. They didn't want him here. But Malik? He wasn't going anywhere. Not yet. At first, Malik thought maybe they just hadn't heard him clearly, so he tried again, louder this time. "Excuse me, sir." The man behind the counter blinked slowly, his jaw tight. He looked Malik up and down from his hoodie to his shoes, before finally saying, "Can I help you with something?" But the way he said it didn't feel helpful at all. His voice was cold, like he was forcing the words out against his will. Malik cleared his throat. "Yeah, I'm in the school hunting club." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded permission slip from the club, and placed it gently on the glass counter. "I was told to check prices for gear and maybe ask about hunting licenses." The man didn't look at the paper. He just stared at Malik's face like he was trying to read something behind his eyes. Malik gave a small, nervous smile, trying to fill the heavy silence. Then the man chuckled quietly, not a friendly laugh, but the kind that made your stomach twist. "You? In a hunting club," he said, smirking. A couple of men near the back leaned in closer, clearly listening now. One of them said, "Maybe the kid's just looking for a new way to rob people in the woods." Laughter followed, dry, cruel, and sharp. The sound stabbed into Malik's ears like ice. He froze, unsure what to say, unsure what to do. His first instinct was to leave, just walk out and never come back. But another part of him, the part that had been through worse, the part that remembered his father's words, "Stand your ground, son," kept him rooted in place. "I'm not here to rob anyone," Malik said, his voice low but firm. "I'm here because I love nature, and I want to learn how to do this the right way." More silence. Then the man behind the counter finally moved. But instead of picking up the paper, his hand dropped under the counter again. Malik didn't know what was there. Maybe a register, maybe something worse. His body tensed, heart beating faster. He wasn't sure if he should speak again or stay silent. He didn't want to be seen as disrespectful, but he also didn't want to seem afraid. The man finally sighed, pulled out a flyer from a stack, and tossed it on the counter. It slid across the glass and stopped right at Malik's fingertips. "There's your prices," he muttered. "Not sure it's for someone like you, though." The words stung more than they surprised Malik. He had heard phrases like that before, soft words with sharp blades inside them. "Someone like you," they always said, never explaining what they meant, because they didn't have to. Malik knew exactly what it meant. He picked up the flyer, eyes scanning it quickly, even though his mind was barely reading. He felt a burning behind his eyes, but he refused to let tears come. He wouldn't cry here, not in front of them. He pressed his lips together and nodded slightly. "Thank you," he said quietly but clearly. Someone behind him snorted. "Watch your pockets, fellas." Another chuckled and added, "You sure he's not just casing the place?" Malik turned his head slightly, just enough to glance at the group. They weren't even trying to hide their grins now. His body was shaking inside, but from the outside he stood still, like a statue made of heat and anger and restraint. A door creaked at the back of the store, and an older man stepped forward. He wore a long faded coat and walked slowly with the help of a cane. He had white hair and dark eyes that looked like they had seen too much. No one paid him much attention at first until he spoke. His voice was gravelly but strong. "That how y'all treat every kid who walks in?" he asked calmly. His words sliced through the laughter like a blade. The room went quiet again, but not the same kind of quiet as before. This one had weight. The clerk looked up, his smirk fading. "Just being careful, sir." The old man stepped closer, tapping his cane with each step. "Careful's one thing," he said, "but disrespect is another." He stopped right beside Malik, looking directly at the clerk now. "This young man asked a question, brought school papers, and treated you with respect." He looked around the room slowly, letting his gaze land on every single man, and all he got in return was mockery and suspicion. No one answered. Even the ones who had laughed earlier were suddenly quiet. The clerk's face was red now, his hands nervously adjusting the stack of papers. "I didn't mean nothing by it," he muttered. The old man raised a brow. "You meant everything by it," he said. "Every boy like him that walks into a place like this remembers how you made him feel." Then he turned to Malik and said gently, "You good, son?" Malik nodded once, not trusting his voice just yet. The old man tapped the glass counter. "Then let's make sure he gets the same service any other kid would." No one moved. No one spoke. They were frozen, not by fear, not by power, but by truth. The sound of the cane tapping on the floor was the only thing breaking the silence now. 3 slow, steady steps, like thunder in a room full of guilt. The old man didn't rush, didn't yell, but somehow every word he spoke carried more weight than shouting ever could. No one dared interrupt him, not even the clerk behind the counter. And Malik, for the first time since he entered that store, he felt like he wasn't standing alone. The old man finally stopped beside him, folded his hands on top of the cane, and gave Malik a nod. Then he looked around at everyone else in the room, slow, deliberate, like he wanted each of them to feel the heat of his stare. "You all froze when he came in," the man said calmly, but not out of fear. He tilted his head slightly. "You froze because of the story you've already written in your heads," before the boy even said a word. One of the men in the back shifted uncomfortably and muttered, "It's not like that." But the old man's voice cut through again. "It's exactly like that." He turned back to the clerk. "This boy brought school papers," he asked politely. "He's doing something positive, something half of you wouldn't have dared at his age." Malik said nothing, but his chest was tight, his palms still a little sweaty. He didn't know who this man was, but right now he was grateful for him. It was like someone had stepped into a storm just to hold up an umbrella for him, a stranger who saw what no one else cared to see, or maybe didn't want to. The clerk cleared his throat, trying to save face. "Look, I didn't mean any harm, all right? We don't usually get kids like him in here." He paused, realizing how bad that sounded, but the words were already out. "Kids like him," the old man repeated, raising an eyebrow. "You mean young, respectful, brave enough to walk into a room full of judgment and still keep his chin up?" No answer came, just silence, thicker and heavier now than before. Even the men who had laughed earlier were staring down at their boots or pretending to study shelves. The air had shifted again, but this time it wasn't thick with hate. It was thick with shame. The old man looked at Malik, his voice gentler now. "What's your name, son?" "Malik," he replied quietly. "Well, Malik," the man said, "you've got more backbone than most grown men I've met." Then he turned to the clerk again. "You're going to answer his questions now, like you would for anyone else, and you're going to do it right." The clerk hesitated, then nodded stiffly. "Yeah, all right." He pulled out a few more brochures, unfolded a map of hunting zones, and started explaining the basics. But his voice was flatter now, quieter, like he knew this moment wasn't really about hunting anymore. Malik listened carefully, eyes focused, head slightly tilted as he took in the information. He asked questions, smart ones, about safety courses, license rules, and gear costs. The old man stood beside him the whole time, occasionally adding little notes or correcting something the clerk left out. The other customers didn't say much now, though one or two pretended to browse closer, maybe listening, maybe curious, but no one dared make another joke. The room had changed, and everyone felt it. After about 10 minutes, Malik folded the papers and slipped them back into his jacket. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice steady. The clerk gave a short nod and muttered something like "good luck," without meeting Malik's eyes. As Malik turned to leave, the old man walked with him. Just before they reached the door, Malik stopped and looked up at him. "Sir," he said, "you didn't have to say anything back there, but you did." "Why?" The old man gave a tired smile. "Because when I was your age, I walked into places like this and saw the same looks, and no one ever said anything for me." He paused, then added, "It matters, son, the way people treat you, but how you carry yourself when they don't matters more." Malik nodded, his throat tight again, but this time from something else, not fear, not anger, just a strange new feeling he hadn't felt in that store until now, a sense of being seen, understood, protected, even if only for a few minutes. The old man held out his hand, and Malik shook it firmly. "I'm Henry," he said. "You ever need advice or someone to go out on a trail with, you let me know." Malik gave a real smile this time, the first one since he stepped into that store. "Thanks, Mr. Henry," he said, stepping outside. The cold air hit his face again, but it didn't feel so harsh anymore, and behind him, for the first time that day, the little door chime rang again. But this time, it didn't sound like warning. It sounded like something was finally beginning. Everyone in the store stayed still, even after Malik left. It was like the moment hadn't fully passed, like the air still held the shape of his presence. No one said a word, and for a few long seconds, the only sound was the soft ring of the door chime fading into silence. The clerk stared down at his hands, pretending to adjust the same stack of papers he'd touched 3 times already. The men who had laughed before suddenly found the floor more interesting than anything else in the shop, but Henry, he just stood there, his cane tapping once against the floor, as if calling the room back to reality. Then he slowly turned toward the rest of them, eyes sharp despite his age. "Well," he asked, his voice not loud but impossible to ignore, "you all good now? Got it out of your system? Or are you still frozen?" Nobody answered. Not one of the men who had mocked Malik could bring themselves to speak. The silence wasn't angry this time, it was ashamed, heavy like wet clothes clinging to the skin, uncomfortable and cold. Henry let the moment stretch before he said anything else. "That boy walked in here braver than most grown men I've ever seen." He looked straight at the man who'd joked about Malik robbing the place. "You think that was funny? You think your words don't matter?" The man opened his mouth, then shut it. Another man coughed awkwardly, stepped back and left the store quietly. Henry shook his head slowly. "You're lucky he didn't walk out angry. You're lucky he walked out at all." Outside, Malik walked down the sidewalk with his hands deep in his pockets again, but he didn't feel the same as when he first arrived. His legs were still shaky, sure, but his chest felt stronger somehow. He wasn't smiling wide or laughing, but there was something glowing inside him, a quiet fire. He had stood his ground, spoken with respect, and watched someone else speak up for him. That had never happened before. Not like that. Back at home, he told his mum everything. She listened with wide eyes, a dish towel still in her hand, frozen mid-fold. When he mentioned the old man with the cane, Henry, her eyes softened. "Henry White?" she asked. "The war vet?" Malik shrugged. "I think so. Wore an old coat and walked like he's seen some stuff." His mum nodded slowly, a faint smile on her lips. "He's known in town. Doesn't say much, but when he does, people listen." That night, Malik lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The store scene replayed again and again in his head. The stares, the mocking, the weight of the silence. But every time, the image of Henry standing beside him pushed its way in. Not just standing, protecting, correcting, lifting. It made Malik wonder how many people were out there like Henry. Quiet watchers, waiting for the right moment to do the right thing. The next few days passed quietly. Malik stayed focused at school, turned in his forms for the hunting club, and tried not to think too much about the store. But word was spreading. One of the customers had told someone, who told someone else. By the end of the week, Malik noticed strange looks in the hallway. Not cruel ones, just curious. One teacher even pulled him aside and asked gently, "You doing all right?" He nodded, not wanting to explain everything again. On Friday afternoon, his hunting club coach pulled him aside after school. "Hey Malik," the coach said, "I heard what happened. I just wanted to say, I'm proud of how you handled it." Malik blinked, a little surprised. "How did you?" The coach smiled. "Small town, remember. Word travels fast, and Henry White called me." Malik's eyebrows shot up. "He called you?" "Yup," the coach chuckled. "Told me you asked smart questions, kept your cool, and acted like a man out there. Said he's got your back." Malik felt his throat tighten again, the same way it had in the store, but this time from something softer. That means a lot," he said quietly. The coach nodded. It should. Not many get that kind of call from Henry. Meanwhile, back at the gun store, things weren't so quiet. A new customer came in, a young man, tall and broad-shouldered, with his daughter by his side. He glanced around and then walked up to the clerk. "You the one who embarrassed that high school kid last week?" The clerk's face turned red instantly. "Look, I didn't mean. Save it," the man said, his voice calm but firm. "That boy handled himself better than half the grown folks in this place." He took a deep breath, then added, "We've got eyes on you now." And just like that, the ripples from that single afternoon spread wider. A boy had walked into a place where he wasn't wanted, and simply by standing tall and refusing to shrink, he had changed something, not just in the store but in the people who saw it happen, and for those who froze in silence. That moment would follow them for a long, long time. The birds were still singing, the sun still rose, and the streets of the town looked the same. But something in the town's rhythm had changed. Malik didn't notice it at first, but others did. People paused a little longer when he passed. Some nodded quietly. Others looked away in guilt. Even those who hadn't been in the gun store had heard the story. Not the full version, just pieces. and somehow the pieces hit harder than anyone expected. It wasn't the kind of story people could easily forget. A boy walking into a store, getting humiliated in silence, and then standing tall when others tried to shrink him. It had weight, and that weight moved from one person to the next, like a stone dropped in still water. Even the man who'd made the first joke, the one about robbing, hadn't come back to the store since that day. Maybe he was embarrassed, maybe he was afraid of what people would say, or maybe he just couldn't look that moment in the eye anymore. Malik, meanwhile, had his eyes forward. The hunting club was getting ready for its first outdoor weekend training. He was excited but nervous. This would be his first real step into a world that didn't often invite people who looked like him, but he had made peace with that. He wasn't walking in to be accepted. He was walking in because he belonged, and now he knew it. Coach handed him a checklist for the trip. "You'll need a few more things," he said. "Boots, gloves, a compass maybe." Malik nodded and tucked the paper into his backpack. He didn't want to go back to that store again. Not alone. But before he could worry about that, he got a message from an unknown number. It read, "This is Henry. Meet me at the shop tomorrow if you're free. 11 a.m. There was no other explanation, no question, just that. Short, straight, and calm, just like the man himself. The next morning, Malik arrived right on time, heart thumping a little harder than usual. He half expected trouble again. More stares, more tension. But as he walked into the store, something strange happened. The chime rang, and this time, no one froze. There were still a few glances, a couple curious looks, but there were no sneers, no mutters, no reaching under the counter. It was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that hurt. Just, Henry was already at the counter, leaning on his cane, speaking with the clerk. Malik approached slowly, unsure what the visit was about. The clerk gave a quick nod, not warm but respectful, and stepped aside without a word. Henry looked over and smiled faintly. "Glad you came." He turned to the glass case and pointed. "You need boots, a compass, you got gloves." Malik blinked, surprised. No sir, not yet." Henry nodded and tapped the counter. "Good, we'll take care of it today. I've already spoken to the manager. No more foolishness." Malik was speechless. "Wait, you're helping me buy this?" Henry gave a small shrug. "I didn't say buy, I said we'd take care of it. Consider it a quiet thank you for keeping your head high when others tried to lower it." Malik's voice caught in his throat. "You don't have to." "I know," Henry said, "but I want to. Let me." The clerk returned with a box of boots, placed it gently on the counter. He didn't speak much, but his hands were careful, his posture respectful. When Malik tried on the gear, Henry nodded approvingly. "Fits well. You look like someone who knows where he's going." As Malik stood at the counter with the gear in hand, another customer walked in. A teenage boy, white, about Malik's age, looked a little nervous. He glanced between Malik and Henry, and then approached slowly. "Hey, you're the guy from the hunting club, right?" he asked. Malik turned, unsure what to say. "Yeah." The boy scratched the back of his neck. "Coach said you knew what to get. I was hoping maybe we could go over the list together." Malik looked at Henry, who gave him a knowing look, a small smile that said, "See what you started." "Sure," Malik said, offering a hand. "Name's Malik." The boy shook it. "Connor." Just like that, a door opened. Not a glass one, not one with a chime, but one between people, one built from respect, from courage, from quiet strength that refused to stay silent when wrong stood too loud. Malik didn't just get his gear that day. He got something bigger, a sense that change doesn't always roar. Sometimes it walks in calmly, speaks when it must, and waits for others to catch up. The first time Malik stepped onto the forest trail with his boots tied tight and gear strapped to his back, the world felt big, but not in a scary way. It felt honest, quiet, wide. There were no judging eyes here, no stares, no whispered jokes, just trees, wind, and space to breathe. His school's hunting club had taken the bus to an open reserve just outside town, and now the students were spreading out, learning the basics, setting up camp. But Malik wasn't thinking about tents or firewood. He was thinking about something bigger, the feeling of being seen, and now the feeling of being watched over. Connor stuck close to Malik, asking questions, following his lead. They had only spoken once before, but something about that handshake back in the store had settled things between them. Connor didn't act nervous anymore. He acted like a teammate. "Do you think they still remember?" he asked while checking his gear. "Remember what?" Malik asked, pretending not to know. "The store thing," Connor said. "My dad told me that kind of stuff doesn't just go away." Malik paused, adjusted the strap on his backpack, then said, "I don't think it needs to go away. It just needs to be seen." Connor nodded slowly, unsure if he fully understood, but wanting to, and for Malik that was enough. Later that evening, as the sky turned orange and the shadows grew long, the coach called everyone to the center of camp. He cleared his throat and pointed to Malik. "Everyone, this is Malik. Some of you know him, some don't, but if you're smart, you'll listen to him." A few heads turned, surprised. "Why him?" one student asked. The coach smiled. "Because he didn't just study the handbook. He lived through something harder than anything I can teach with a chalkboard." Malik's face flushed, not from shame, but from sudden attention. He didn't ask to be the example, but here he was. So he stood up, heart pounding, and said, "I came here just wanting to learn like the rest of you. But before I even picked up a brochure, I was told, not with words but with looks, that I didn't belong." No one moved, no one whispered. He kept going. "Sometimes you don't have to do anything wrong to be treated wrong, and sometimes someone you don't expect stands up for you. When that happens, you don't forget it, and you don't waste it." The coach nodded, clearly proud, and said, "That's why he's your lead today for the trail test. Follow his instructions. Stay close. He knows his stuff." And just like that, Malik went from outsider to leader. Not because of pity, not because of noise, but because he had shown something real: calm under pressure, respect under fire, and strength when silence tried to crush him. As night fell, the forest hummed softly, and the stars blinked through the trees. Malik sat by the fire, boots stretched toward the heat, hands wrapped around a steaming cup of cocoa. Connor sat beside him, tossing pebbles into the dark. "Hey," Connor said, "my dad wants to meet you sometime. He's a vet too." Said Henry was his friend. Malik raised an eyebrow. "Henry has friends." They both laughed quietly, not loudly, just the kind of laugh shared between people who understand each other, without needing to explain much. Back in town, the gun store had started to change in small but visible ways. A sign now hung in the front window: "All are welcome, no exceptions." The clerk had grown quieter, more professional. Henry still stopped by once a week, not to lecture, just to check. He'd nod, ask one question, and then leave. His presence alone was enough to remind everyone that silence had a price. One afternoon, the store owner, a woman who rarely appeared in public, came in and walked directly to the counter. She placed a photo frame there. Inside it, a black and white picture of her father and 3 soldiers, one of them clearly African American. "He died fighting for this country," she said, "and I won't have his sacrifice disrespected by small minds." No one argued, no one dared. That photo stayed, right beside the register, where everyone had to see it. Malik didn't know about the photo yet, or the sign, or the conversations happening in town. He didn't know his story had inspired changes he might never see, but he felt something deep inside as he stared into the fire that night. He felt steady. He had walked into a place where he was not wanted, spoken when silence tried to swallow him, and now he was here, leading, learning, growing, not just in the forest, but in life. And those who had once frozen at his presence? Now they had to thaw, because Malik wasn't walking quietly anymore. He was walking with purpose. Malik wasn't looking for attention, but sometimes when you do the right thing, even if it feels small, people notice, and sometimes people talk. By the end of the week, the local newspaper called his school, asking for a comment. His coach called Malik into his office and handed him the phone. "There's a reporter on the line. Says she wants to tell your story, the real one." Malik stared at the phone, unsure whether to pick it up or run out the door. He wasn't famous, wasn't special, just a teenager who walked into a store and stood his ground. But maybe that was the point. He picked up the phone, heart pounding. "Hello?" A woman's voice replied, warm and professional. "Hi Malik, I heard what happened at the shop and how you handled it. Would you be open to an interview? I think a lot of people could learn something from you." Malik paused, thought about Henry, about Connor, about all the people who had stayed silent, and the ones who hadn't. Then he said, "Okay, but only if it's honest." The article came out the following Monday, titled "One Voice, One Stand: How a Teen's Calm Changed a Town." It didn't exaggerate, didn't twist anything, it just told the truth. About a 17-year-old boy walking into a gun shop, about silence that wasn't empty, it was loaded, and about one voice, soft but strong, that said, "I belong here." People around town started seeing Malik differently. Some smiled at him in passing, others nodded from across the street, and a few apologized, quietly, awkwardly, but sincerely. Even the clerk from the gun store walked up to him at the grocery store one day, cleared his throat and said, "You were right to stand tall. I didn't see it then. I do now." Malik just nodded, not because he forgot, but because he forgave. And forgiveness wasn't weakness, it was freedom. At school, the principal called him into the office again, this time not for trouble, but for honor. The school wanted him to speak at the student assembly, just a few words, they said, about courage, respect, and standing up without fighting back. Malik felt nervous, but he remembered the stare of the clerk, the calm of Henry, and the way silence can scream, so he agreed. The day of the assembly, the gym was packed. Hundreds of students sat on metal bleachers, some chewing gum, others whispering, but when Malik stepped up to the microphone, a hush fell. He didn't have a fancy speech, just his truth. "I didn't go looking for a moment," he said. "I just walked through a door, but when that door tried to close on me, I stayed standing. I didn't yell, I didn't threaten, I just showed up and stayed." He looked around the room, at faces young and unsure. You don't have to be loud to be strong. Sometimes, being calm is louder than shouting. Sometimes the best way to fight hate is to stay human. The students clapped, not just politely, but with real energy. And when Malik stepped down, he saw Connor clapping the hardest. Later, some kids he didn't even know came up to him. "Thanks, man," one said. "That was deep." Another said, "I felt that silence before too, but I didn't know what to do. Now I do." Meanwhile, Henry sat in his old chair at home, newspaper in hand. He had read Malik's quote at least 10 times already. He smiled quietly, muttered, "Good boy," and folded the paper neatly beside his coffee. Henry didn't need to say much. He had already done his part. Now, it was Malik's turn to carry it forward. The next weekend, Malik and Henry met at the edge of a wooded trail. Malik brought 2 thermoses of coffee, one for each of them. Henry took his and said, "So they got you on stage now?" Malik chuckled. "Yeah, you started it." Henry sipped his coffee and said, "No, you did. I just reminded people what fairness looks like." They walked quietly through the trail, leaves crunching underfoot. Malik asked questions about tracking, footprints, wind and scent. Henry answered without showing off. He was just passing on what he knew, one careful step at a time. At one point, they stopped beside a small stream. Henry looked at Malik and said, "You know, the world doesn't always clap for the right people." Malik tilted his head, curious, "But you don't need applause, you need direction, and you've got that now." Malik smiled softly, the words sinking in deeper than he expected. "Thanks for walking with me," he said. Henry nodded. "Thanks for not backing down." The water bubbled softly beside them. Birds flitted through the trees. There was no crowd, no cameras, no noise. Just 2 people who had survived different storms, now walking side by side. And though Malik didn't know what the future held exactly, he did know this: he had a voice, he had a story, and the courage to keep using both. The first snow came early that year. White dust covered the sidewalks, rooftops and tree branches. Everything felt quiet, clean and new. Malik stood at his bedroom window, watching flakes swirl in the wind. It was strange how much could change in just a few months, and how, despite it all, he was still just a 17-year-old boy trying to find his place in the world. But now, that place felt a little more real. He had gear in his closet, books on safety and survival stacked on his desk, and a compass on his shelf, a gift from Henry, silver and worn, with his initials carved into the side. Malik would sometimes hold it in his hand late at night, letting the weight remind him where he came from. Not just his town, not just his skin, but the moment when he refused to back down and everything changed. That weekend, Malik and a few students from the hunting club helped organize a free workshop for younger kids. It was nothing big, just a few borrowed tents, some practice trails and basic survival lessons. But when the kids arrived, their eyes lit up, and when Malik showed them how to build a fire or tie a knot, they listened closely. To them, he wasn't just a student, he was a guide, someone who had been there and made it through. One little boy, no older than 10, stared up at him wide-eyed and asked, "Do you ever get scared out there?" Malik smiled, squatted down and said, "Yeah, I do, but I keep moving anyway." The boy nodded slowly, then gave him a proud little thumbs up. Malik watched him run back to his group, heart warm in a way he hadn't felt before. He didn't realize it yet, but this was the beginning of something bigger, something lasting. Back at home that evening, Malik's mum was waiting for him with a warm meal and a quiet smile. She sat across from him at the kitchen table and finally said the words she'd been holding for weeks. "You know, I never told you this, but when I heard what happened in that store, I was scared." Malik looked up, surprised. "I've seen too many stories that don't end well. I thought I might lose you to anger, to hurt." She reached over and squeezed his hand. "But instead, I watched you grow, not just taller, but wiser, braver. You made me proud, baby." Malik didn't say much, just nodded and blinked back the tears that were trying to rise. Sometimes the deepest words don't need to be answered, just felt. Henry, meanwhile, kept to his quiet routine. He still stopped by the shop once a week, still walked the trails with his cane and thermos, but now, when people saw him, they didn't just see an old man. They saw a reminder that silence can be broken, that one voice, well-timed, can shift the ground beneath a whole room. One afternoon, the store's owner approached Henry, her voice low. "We're thinking of starting a community program, training kids from all backgrounds. Would you help us shape it?" Henry raised an eyebrow and replied, "Only if you let Malik lead one of the sessions." The owner smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." And so weeks later, Malik stood in the same store where he was once humiliated. But now it looked different, not because the walls had changed, but because the people had. He stood in front of a small group of young teens, boys and girls from all backgrounds, and behind him stood Henry, arms crossed, watching with quiet pride. Malik opened the session with the simplest words he could think of. "I walked into this store once and thought I made a mistake." He let the silence settle before continuing. "But that mistake wasn't mine. It belonged to people who judged before knowing, to people who forgot what respect looks like." He took a breath, eyes scanning the young faces in front of him. "And now we're going to do better together." The kids leaned in, listening. Some parents stood nearby, nodding, and even the clerk from that day stood in the back, hands folded, silent, not from shame, but from listening. When the session ended, Malik stepped outside, the cold air biting gently at his cheeks. Snow had started to fall again, soft and slow. He tilted his head up, let the flakes land on his skin, and for the first time in a long time, he felt complete. He didn't need everyone's approval. He didn't need the past to vanish. He just needed the chance to rise from it, and to help others do the same. As he walked toward the edge of town, his boots crunching softly in the snow, he pulled the compass from his coat pocket. It still pointed north, still steady and sure, just like him now. Malik wasn't just a kid who stood tall once. He had become a symbol, not loud, not perfect, just real, a reminder that even when everyone freezes, someone brave enough to stay standing can warm the whole room.